Well, welcome back, everybody, to our last event of this afternoon, the Roundtable. I'm not going to go through everybody's introductions again, except for, because you've all been introduced, sure. Julia Stryker, welcome. I got to read this really close now. Okay, Julia Stryker is the former Pratt postdoc in Newfoundland, Labrador military, naval, and maritime history, and current adjunct professor for Memorial University. She received her PhD in history at the University of Texas at Austin for her research into women's labor at sea in the 19th century British Empire. She is working with the Lloyd's Heritage Foundation and the Marine Institute to hold symposia for the history and current state of women in maritime industries, to develop resources promoting retention and recruitment as part of the Seafaring Women Aboard and Ashore Network. That's a mouthful. Welcome, Julia Stryker. And of course, we have Vicki Hallett, Margot Dooley, William Keogh, Terry Bishop Sterling, and I'm the facilitator. I'm just going to not have an opinion of my own for this.
Dr. Heidi Coombs.
Yes, Heidi Coombs. Heidi Coombs, the facilitator. So this is going to be really organic, I think. I don't have any specific questions beyond generic. If anyone wants to speak to some challenges that you've faced during your research, how you've overcome those challenges, or if there's what you see in terms of moving forward. I know the last session, Rhea spoke about mental health files that nobody seems to know. And I have also searched for the same records, and nobody seems to know where they are. So sometimes records disappear, which is one challenge, but any challenges that you face doing this history, because it's sometimes you got to think outside the box to get at records related to women and gender diverse folks.
Maybe I'll start and just say, beyond things being willfully destroyed, which absolutely happens, oftentimes by the person in question, I heard a story, might have been someone on this panel, whose grandmother had kept meticulous diaries over years and years and years, and they went back to visit her in her elderly age. And when she went to visit her, these books had been kept up on a shelf for their whole family's history, and they could always remember, don't touch Mom's books. They were Mom's books. She wrote in them every day. Don't touch them. And she went back to visit her mother, and she walked into the room, and there was a wood stove, and her mother was meticulously taking each book down, chucking it in the wood stove. And that was it. This lifetime of diaries, she was destroying them herself. So sometimes it's the person themselves who destroys something. But beyond that, one of the things I find challenging, and this is whenever I give a presentation to an audience, I usually say, if you have things, keep them. Because one of the things we also do is not recognize that something is important. Oh, so Nan had this bunch of old junk. No one's interested in that, sure. Nan's old God. And so valuing our own stories, oh my God, right? And here we are talking about it, because that's one of the key things too, is beyond what's in the past, making people aware now of what you should be keeping and valuing our stories, the ordinary people and the things that they do.
I'll pick up from there. It's not only, in addition to the problem of valuing and keeping things, the pressing question now is where to store them. Because the archives are running out of space. There's a huge backlog at archives and special collections. It's years and years and years. And I think we're kind of at a crisis because of that. And the other thing that's happening outside of St. John's is the unbelievable underfunding of local history museums. There's about 250 heritage societies. I could be getting the number wrong, but it's in the dozens and dozens and dozens. And if you divvied up the total budget divided it by the number of heritage societies, we're talking about 10 or 15 bucks a piece. It's scarcely, changed the lock on the door. So that's the other problem. And I really think we're in a crisis. I'm ready to do a sit-in somewhere at the Confederation building, and that I'm going to call it, I'm no longer calling this Memorial University of Newfoundland, and I am a proud graduate of this university. I'm calling it Memorial Institute of Science and Technology, MIST, which will also pick up on a fog kind of, metaphor. Yeah. So that's my little tirade.
I just want to cut in right there to point out that we all know that Memorial doesn't actually have a university archive, don't we? We all know that that's
institutional bond. Yeah, that's another problem.
That's something I've been working on, hopefully for the benefit of all of us. But yes, one thing we run into a problem is finding space for the new stuff that's coming in. We need to fund new archivists, right? We need more archivists. We need more archives. And we also are actually really in danger of losing some of the stuff that we do have when you don't properly maintain things. I mean, when I say there's no university archives, it doesn't mean that we haven't retained those records. What it means is that they're in a secret room I know the location of, but I'm not allowed into, and nobody's looked at them since the last person was in charge of that. And of course, there have been problems with record storage, there have been problems with mold, there have been problems with these things, but if you just don't let anybody in the room, it's not a problem, because you can't find it. You can't find the problem. So I just wanted to add on that bit, is that we really do need to look out for the institutions that we do have.
If I could add to that, and certainly I had great success in the archives, I must say. I mean, I was told when I first went in the archives, you're not going to find anything about women, Irish women in Newfoundland in the 1700s and 1800s. And, after 4 years, Keeley, my supervisor, and Shannon Ryan were saying, Willeen, get out of the archives and start writing. So there is stuff there. It's painstaking work. And you do a lot of reading against the grain and rethinking and thinking, now, what is that actually telling me as opposed to what it's not telling me, and who is saying it? When I hear like quotes about what, Captain Wheeler said, and these are old farts in Britain. Why are we paying so much attention to what they said? Why don't we figure out how people felt about these women on the ground? And so yes, I use those kinds, I use court records, I used government records, I used, merchant records. I did all newspapers, I did all that stuff. But for me, getting out into the communities, doing oral history, and I know lots of people do oral history, but really sort of methodically thinking about what is this telling me. And speaking to people is hard. For me, it was hard to get women to talk to me originally. They didn't think that they had much to say, but they did. And sometimes they didn't realize they were even saying it. I had one lovely lady, Mrs. Costello in Calvert, and oh my God, she was lovely, and we had lunch and we had tea and all that. And after 2 hours, she said, now, when are we going to start work? I said, well, I was about to leave because we've done a lot of work, right? It was just, she didn't realize that what she had been talking about was important. So I think that that's a real treasure trove, and I know all sorts of people in Heritage Newfoundland, Labrador doing all sorts of that, but I still see that as a great unmined source. And also, my God, take the wallpaper off the walls and see what's behind it. Tear up the canvas from the floor and see what's left out in the stable. The places that you can find information, just fascinating. And indeed, I will echo the need for, community museums and archives. I found a whole lot of stuff back in the late 90s and early 2000s when I was on the road. And now underfunded, closed, such a shame. So, yeah.
First of all, I want to thank everybody who presented And particularly the last session, I learned a lot, and I think we could have really just launched from that session. I think a general discussion about, who's missing from the record, and also the very creative ways you try to answer some of these questions. I'm not sure that I'm that creative. I'm a pretty old-fashioned historian, and I love my documents. So I have the same issues of, things disappearing. When I first moved home from graduate school, one of the organizations I was very interested in was the Child Welfare Association. Linda talked in her opening session about all the women's organizations that we know so little about. Well, this organization existed for half a century. Dozens of women, generations of women involved in it, did a huge amount of work. And those records, other than an annual report, which is like 12 pages long, this many women came to the clinic, did this. They were having monthly meetings, for one thing. All those records are gone. And records do get destroyed. Otto Tucker told me that when he went home after his mother's death, he looked down on the beach one morning and his father had a big bonfire going, and in his grief was just burning all his wife's records. And she had been a very active Salvation Army officer, done a lot of work in her community. So that was gone. But certainly oral history, things, that's one of the I think, themes that has come up in the last couple of days, fabric in particular, but objects. So shoes are important. So many things that are important. The arrangement of houses, all of these things are so important. Songs, some of the songs we heard last night, poems, different ways of getting at some of these stories and some of the harder to find stories.
I guess I want to pick up a little bit on that theme, and I'll talk a little bit more about my research, just to ground everybody in sort of the experience that I've had, which is that I work in the Maritime History Archive, mainly with crew agreements and logbooks, which are very official documents. They're contracts. They tend to be viewed as very dry. The largest thing they were ever used for, which was really quite large, but was an economic study of the shipping of Atlantic Canada, which doesn't get hearts racing.
Feed you through, but
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I speak too soon. Let me tell you about tonnage ratios. Be still my heart. Yes. To be fair, there was a lot of cool stuff in there. But anyway, and this is one of the things I said. You said, "Oh, there's no women in there." Oh, God, there's a ton of women in there. There's women all over the place. And they had found all of these women. This is another thing that tends to happen, right? Is even in these archives that have been kind of well looked over, if you are classical and you are just looking at documents, it's worth it to go back in and look again, because people have gone over these and they have looked through them. And I've got to tell you, you look at them and sometimes indeed there's nothing to say. That is sometimes true. But a lot of the time, especially with women, marginalized identities, sort of the more nuanced parts of what's going on, it's incredibly rich, incredibly rich. So a lot of the stuff that I had been looked at before, a lot of stuff I looked at had been looked at before. And because they were focused on other things, because there were other ways of doing things that they were more focused on doing, they just had nothing to say. And so you can find something amazing and unique, and nobody's talked about it, even though 100 people have looked at it, because instead they were talking about tonnage ratios, which has its place, indeed. But you can go back and you can find more. If they tell you there's no women, they probably just haven't looked at them. They're probably there. They tell you there's no marginalized identities. They're there. They're probably there. You just have to look again.
That's such an important point. Oh, sorry, William. I just wanted to go back to something that Bonnie Morgan was talking about yesterday, right? When she was reading through those minute books for the church women's history that she did. She was reading through things and sort of, yeah, flip. Oh, look, they talk about this is important. Meanwhile, she's read through 5 or 6 pages and all this important stuff, right? And then she finally realized, oh, wait a minute. all that stuff that I was reading, that's super important. So yeah, so that's a point well taken. You know, you can look at the same thing with two different perspectives and see very different things and interpret those things differently as well, right? Depending on the kinds of theory you have in your mind and what you want to be looking for. And, you know, to refer to my eminent colleague, Dr. Sonia Boone, one of our favorite things to think about and talk about is how do we read the silences as well in the archive? Sometimes those silences are not as silent as we imagine, but also they're not just silent, they're resonant with things, right, that echo within that silence. So what's happening to Ria's point that she just made just in the past panel, looking at the story of the curtains. That's a story about curtains, but it's a story about class and moral expectations and sexuality and, you know, and what we think of as what you do to a house and how the neighbors are going to see it. So there's so much more in the story about curtains. So reading those silences and the gaps and, you know, trying to be creative, and there's lots of ways to do that. So yeah, I think our points about, you know, what isn't there, but also what is there and how to come at it kind of sideways is important.
Just a reflection on that. I'm beginning to think I'm going to sound like Cassandra here. The other concern I have is, yes, we can go into the archives and reread, but who's going to do it? Because the history department is down to a minuscule number of people. What is it, one person dedicated to Newfoundland history? And if you look at the presenters here over this weekend, I've been stunned at the quality of what's going on. It's been phenomenal. But so many people are independent scholars. And that's another, I think, very troubling thing that's happening. And we desperately need to reinterpret our history because we're stuck in a very traditional view of the past. If you just look at the main, the lack of Indigenous voices is, you know, huge, and we've heard it, how important that is today. But the other thing, if you look at the predominating narrative of Newfoundland history, it's a maritime one. What happens if you shift your focus to the land and women's work on the land? All that unpaid household labor, how is that interfacing with the subsidization of the fishery? If we looked at the crisis of the fishery in the late 19th century and the decline of, supposed decline in the quality of salt cod, I think there's something profound going on. And in fact, we should look at what's going on through the lens of development theory in West Africa, because what's happening is women are being displaced by colonial concepts of what's appropriate women's work from their traditional work. At the same time, new fishing technologies are coming in. And I think a crisis point is reached in women's work. And we could actually see that women's work by the late 19th century is probably subsidizing the fishery. I'm guessing it was somewhere between 30 and 40%. And yet we continue to focus upon the maritime narrative. I'm looking for someone to write the ode to Mrs. Murphy's potato. And can we have the jig to, you know, Mrs. Face's turnip? We really have to kind of jigger how we're seeing the world. And that's going to take a new generation of scholars to do it.
I'm very encouraged, though, by the new generation of scholars I'm seeing. I'll have to say that. And I do see gender history's future in interdisciplinarity.
Yeah, but we need to hire them.
Yeah, but, you know, all across, broadly across disciplines. But I also, I mean, I'm going to make a pitch here too, because we talk about gender history and still we're talking about women's history, mostly in this room, right? So we need to look at gender diversity. We need to look at sexual fluidity. We need to look at all those things. Now, I understand that we all start from a site of oppression that, you know, you need to then say, okay, listen to us, we're here too. And so you have to carve out that territory. But then we become oppressors ourselves in terms of not listening to other people. So we're starting to do that, and that's great. But more work needs to be done, you know, on all these, you know, we need to do, like I was so delighted to see Rhea's presentation today. And also then that tension, you know, and thinking in terms of intersectionality. you know, we tend to sort of crave a sort of sense of sisterhood and we're all coming together, when really there are so many tensions in our experiences. You know, because of class, because of race, because of sexuality, religion, yada, 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 ableism, all those things, right? And so we always seem to sort of look for that moment when we reach out to each other and have those kumbaya moments. And there's so much tension in history. We need to have more messy history, absolutely. And I had that on my list before Rhea
Love
made
that phrase, yeah.
the presentation today. So I would make a pitch for that in the archives and elsewhere as well, right? It's there.
One of the things that Julia said about Cormac is, you know, that she rejected the notion of sort of a, you know, a villain or a hero. And one of the things I see happening so much in popular history now is people in the past being reduced simply to that.
Yeah.
Having said that, I totally agree that there are statues that need to come down and buildings and institutions that need to be renamed. You know, but between Mother Teresa and Hitler lie the majority of humanity. And I think when we look at people in the past, we do have to see them as, like ourselves, flawed human beings who are creatures of their own time and place, doing what they thought they needed to do to get by, if that was the case. You know, not every politician, you know, was in there just for power. You know, some of them actually thought that they had something to contribute to their community and something good to do. And they made mistakes and they passed legislation that had sometimes intended effects, sometimes unintended effects, good and bad. So I think that this ahistorical way that I see so much treatment of people in the past does bother me. And I think we have to sort of look at that. Yes, we can look at early feminist leaders and see how narrow their view was, as future generations will look at us and say the same thing. But I think we need to try and look at people within their own time and understand them in their own context.
Just, I think I have a story from the research that applies to that because it's kind of an interesting moment. So women's labor at sea, right? When we think of this, we tend to think of the rise of steamliners. So late 19th century into the 20th century, you get these big, glorious ocean liners, Titanic type stuff. But women were working on ships well before that. Part of the problem is that the women who worked on ships in that late 19th to early 20th century were the ones who were equipped and were able and whose words about their experiences we have the most of. And what they said is that we were the first. There is nobody before this, and it's so unusual, and this is how they framed their experience. And the problem with that is not necessarily that it's untrue. They do feel like the first. They are the first ones going into their own experiences, and you have to sort of justify their own stories that they're telling themselves because it is true. And then you have to go back and say, I mean, they were very wrong. They're super wrong. There's tons of women before them. They just don't know them. So I end up with this tension in my work where I have to talk about there's the things that people say, there's the things that people say about themselves, there's the things that get published about the people that are out there, and then there are the things that we can actually find that happened. And it does end up being this strange tension between, like, we need to put the experience of this person on kind of a pedestal, listen to her words, pay attention to her construct, and then also be like, and I'm sorry, she didn't accurately portray the past, and that's fine. She's not a historian. She's not supposed to. But yeah, it is kind of tense, right? These are messy people that are saying messy things, even about their own times.
And we've so I was just going to say, we've so constructed male and maritime and female land that it lives to this day. I happen to sail, and I sailed into, I won't mention the outport. This was admittedly in the 1990s, probably changed a bit since then. And I got off, admittedly, I wasn't looking my best. I was in my sailing outfit. But the question was, be ye man or woman? And there was a little girl who came down to the wharf. She was not allowed to go on the boats at all. And you could see her young brothers kind of leaping from one to the other. I think I started a social revolution in there, actually. I gave her my little whistle, that if you fall overboard, you whistle and hope you're going to die soon because you don't want to swim with them in the North Atlantic for very long. But that's, I mean, it just shows how to this day, in popular culture, how bifurcated the sense of gender is in Newfoundland.
Okay, so we will throw it open to the audience. I have a mic down here, and Darcy has one up there.
I'm so surprised that no one's talking about digitization of records. Maybe because there are so many problems,
Yeah.
but, okay. But I mean, one of the ways of doing that is to digitize the records. I know we all love to look at the handwriting, which our grad students can't even read anymore. But one of the ways of preserving records is digitization. And the funds for that, I have no idea how widely available they are. And it seems to me that there's lots of,
They're
okay,
not, yeah.
all right, okay. Then maybe we should be pushing for more funds for digitization in order to preserve those records. And when I was much younger, a group of us in the early 70s decided to do a labor history bibliography. I think we had an OFY grant, an Opportunities for Youth grant back then. And we went around to archives in the country. We actually traveled. And we were told, there are no labor records. Yes, there were.
And I add a little, a note of warning about digitization, though, and that is that it does tend to make you sort of use the search functions instead of immersing yourself in the body of documents. And I think something is lost there, but it is quicker, it's easier, and you're looking for the quick fix. But gosh, when I was first in court records, I mean, they weren't even organized really. I mean, there were random court records, although by region, yes, but other than that, everything was shoved in a box and you just took it all out and you just looked at it. But boy, did you ever get immersed in the past when you did that. So with digitization, it's a little, but still, yes. And for storage, absolutely, right?
I have to interject because I love the DAI and how easy it is to access documents online. And I'm also terrified of increased digitization because of AI, which yeah. Okay.
You want me to go for it? Okay. Margot, you could mention, when you mentioned the issue of sailing, what you had to go through to find a survival suit in a boating store that sold women's clothes as shorts and t-shirts and men's clothes as survival suits. But that's, but there's so much to say. The need for interdisciplinarity is so clear. And the fact that people aren't here, they didn't know they could come. You know, I've run into people outside who said, oh, I didn't know there was a conference going on, but I'm not in academe, or I'm, you know, it's a shame. And I meant to mention to Linda Cullum, I just realized that there was an extension service, what was it called? The Rural Women's Learning Project at Memorial. And thanks to Margot, I got to meet this wonderful woman named Frances Laracy in Conception Harbor. I didn't know till I found out accidentally that an interview that Linda Cullum did with her is online,
Mm.
you know, thanks to that project, which is long gone. So I guess I'm talking about different things, but it connects in the way that if community women and community men saw the value of what they're doing recognized by the university, I think we would have more public support. And in terms of interdisciplinarity, it's absolutely needed. You know, I was fortunate to teach in a graduate program in a college of technology, but I could do women in technology and the sociology of technology. And it was cool. It was a coup. But anyway.
Just back to the archival thing, and this is something that Heritage NL has been dealing with a lot since we took over the intangible cultural heritage mandate from the province. And it's great to be able to take over mandates, but Heritage is severely underfunded, absolutely underfunded. And we've gone out to communities, like when I went out to Little Bay, and that's just one example of these communities that have records that are important to the whole province, not just only to their community. And also when you go through and see how people are sorting things, we look at history with broad strokes too, of what's important. So the history of the constabulary, oh, that's important. The history of the railroad, that's important. But then we generalize so much what the history of this place is. And getting back to the fact that you can't get any Newfoundland history courses in Mon, I could have a whole conference just on that. But our understanding of history is never going to change until we see and have the resources to look at all the things that make up our history. But starting with archival resources, there was a business on the Southern Shore that closed down a little while ago, and he had a whole stable or shed full of records, and the family burnt them. But they don't see the value in it, and also they don't have anyone to take stuff off their hands and do anything with it. So that's why you see stuff, you know, being thrown away, and that's why 50 years down the road we'll say, oh, those records didn't exist. The pictures I showed you yesterday were in a house we designated. We went out and saw that house because it had been bought by someone, and we kind of knew what was going to happen once that person bought it. And it happened. They stripped the house from top to bottom, and they had a bonfire on the beach and burnt everything. Because we don't see those individual little lives that people lived, like I'm living my little individual life now, we don't see that as being important. So that stuff goes to the landfill, or that stuff gets burnt in a fire. And it all comes down to the fact that we're not funding our heritage. We're doing a great job of talking about how much heritage we have, but we're doing nothing to protect it and to fund it.
Way back in first year history, I was told the definition of history. E.H. Carr's good old, what is history? History is the study of the significant past. And even at 17, I kind of knew that of course begged the next question, which is who decides what's significant? And so I think that still is not a bad starting point for a discussion of what history is, because, you know, because of that, you know, each generation, each group, each person can decide what's significant. And that's why we continue to have new histories. And that's why, you know, Margot felt that she had to, you know, re-examine her first book on suffrage, because even your own perspective of what is significant changes over time. And so I think we need to see, you know, that, and what is significant to me is not necessarily significant to the next person, but we should respect what's significant to other people. And so I think that, you know, some of the stories I've heard in the last couple of days, you know, were just fascinating questions that I wouldn't have thought to ask. Because that's where you start, with good questions.
And if I might say, on behalf of, you know, like our history department's shrinking, it's because I think a lot are sort of caught in this moment where, you know, the bums and seats have disappeared to other disciplines, and now you can't rationalize your existence anymore. And so you can't hire people to come in with new and exciting information and ideas, which puts the bums in seats, right? And so it's like you're in this sort of vicious circle of hell,
Yeah,
right?
I'd like to add a perspective to that. I hate to talk about the United States because it's so discredited, but at any rate, I did work at Big Ten institutions in the United States. And in fact, the other part of me was working on curricular reform. There are a number of institutions who have preserved the humanities, but they've done it by restructuring their general education requirements. And they're institutions who continue to ask the fundamental question of education, which is, why are we educating people? And that, I think, circles back to the liberal arts and sciences, that we want people to be able to think outside of their fields. And institutions have faced these sorts of economic crises. God knows in the United States this happened in the 1980s and it's going to happen again. But there were institutions who said, this is worth preserving and let's think about how to do it. And the minute you build the humanities in that critical perspective into technological programs, you're building up enrollments. I've worked at a Big Ten institution where the engineering department had philosophers. We just have to reimagine how we structure things and what really matters. And we're seeing the sad effects of just going down a solely science technology path when you see the sorts of decisions that are made without any thought of the broader ramifications. And as Carol mentioned, she worked in a college of technology teaching liberal arts courses. So it can be done.
Be done, but
Yeah.
universities don't have the wherewithal to support it.
Well, no, these institutions were in crisis.
Yeah.
It's a choice of where you put your money and what you think matters in education. And every department is going to say, I can't spare another course. They've got to know this, that, or that. But you've got to have a bunch of faculty that step back from their own self-interest and say what really matters to an education. And it's a matter of values. It's a matter of choice. Yes, we're all under financial pressures, but you can make better decisions than are being made.
And just add that when you're getting operating grants from governments and they want you to tie what you're doing to jobs in the marketplace. Right?
I've been there.
It's hard to do it. It's hard.
It's hard, but it's not impossible. It's just not.
Got a question here from someone.
Just to go back, just briefly, somebody talked earlier about what people are taught in school. My kids went through the Newfoundland Labrador education system, and as far as they're concerned, all they were ever taught in social studies was about fishery. That's it. And that's all the years and years and years of fishery. So when my younger son was involved in the Smallwood project, he was fascinated by the letters because it was a totally different story that he'd never heard at all. So curriculum is certainly part of it. But I do want to go back to Wileen's point about messy histories, because I think that is important, working on messy histories. I'm not an historian. I will never be a historian. I sometimes masquerade at one, but I'm not an historian. I'm someone who loves archives. But I do think messy histories are really important, but I think we then also need to think about messy ways of writing history and messy ways of engaging with stuff. Julia pointed out to Sadia Hartman. You can look at Natalie Harkin. You can look at Emner Basie-Phillip, who's not an historian either, but her work with Zong was phenomenal. So if there's ways for us to write differently, as well as approach the materials differently, we also need to write differently and produce in different ways. Anyway, that was the point that I was going to make. But also, the last point I was going to make is Heidi and Terry and Wileen and Margot and Vicky and all the organizing people for this conference. I just want to say thank you, because you're all sort of in one space right now.
We have a question from Julia online as well.
More of a comment than a question. And sorry, I'm on the move, so I have my camera off. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm glad that Sonia kind of brought it back to, Sonia, that was you, right? I think that was your voice. Okay. Brought it back to the question of messy histories, because I wanted to reflect on something Julia Stryker said about, how the women in the past getting it wrong, and yet also still needing to be like acknowledged for the position that they're in, and the points that I think it was Terry picked up on about Cormac and nuance in history. Because one thing I didn't mention in my talk, because I went too fast, is Ingeborg Marshall. And I just wanted to sort of acknowledge the incredible work that she did over an incredibly long career. And her archive is now deposited at Archives and Special Collections. And I've been through it, and it's incredible. And it's this kind of simultaneous sense of walking alongside someone, and everywhere she's been, I go. And to this day, she was such an archive rat that even with the aid of digitization, I've only found maybe 5 archival documents that she didn't already find. And we don't agree in many things in terms of how to interpret these documents. But I think it's so important to acknowledge the fact that there are past generations who may not be coming from the same sort of political standpoint, and yet whose work still has incredible value. And I worry sometimes that the way things are happening, in particular because there's so little resource to go around, is that we sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater and reinvent the wheel over and over again. And so I just really wanted to take this opportunity, because I've been agonizing over having not mentioned her in my talk, and it feels like a good place to do it here. Thank you all, the organizers, so much. I wish I was there in person.
Oh, we wish you were here too, Julia. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Do we have any more questions? Comments?
And I think
I have
too,
a comment. Oh, no, that's okay.
I just want to say the people who do keep archives, looking at you, Charlotte Strong, whose records of her great aunt Eve became absolutely fundamental to my life and my research. Without your keeping boxes of Aunt Eve's work, I would never have met her or you, and none of the research into Phoebe Florence Miller's poetry, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so the people who keep things against the odds, thank you. And that's invaluable and so important. So I want to acknowledge that too, the record keepers in the room here with us and wherever you are. It's so important that you do that.
One thing that so I'm in medicine now. I'm not in medicine, I'm at the med school. I'm a doctor, but not one of those doctors. And the MDs, I'll twitch when someone calls me doctor. But one thing that I've been noticing with incoming cohorts of med students is that a lot of them, now it could be a particular type of student, self-professed type A's, they seem to think they know a lot more than they do. And so they will hear something on CBC, or they will read something in the newspaper. And I'm not meaning to slag on media. Media is very important, and I love CBC. But it never, something that somebody learns in the media never gives the historical context and grounds the conversation the way that it really needs to be. But they don't know that, and they don't care. So my worry is that the younger generations coming up behind us, they don't see the value in any of this. Some of them think they know what they need to know. And I'm coming from a little bit of a cynical place myself, but I'm not sure there are so many challenges to this history, doing this history. And where do we go from here? Like there's budget cuts. We couldn't get a shirk for this event, even though it was, the application was better than anything I saw go through the med school. Your funding is being cut. History department, MUN is being cut. There's just no, the investment is not there for what needs to be happening.
I guess I wanted to point back to Christina's work and work on our own families and our own communities, and encouraging our nieces and daughters and sons and our kids of any gender, talking to them about the importance of our families and our communities' histories, right? And telling those stories, how much storytelling, we've all talked about that. And I was talking with a friend of mine recently and just sort of said, press record. And she was like, what do you mean? I said, next time you're chatting with your girlfriends or with your mom or with your nan, you got your phone right there. You got a recorder right there in your hand. Hit record. Just take a note. I don't know, like, and that sounds really naive and like, oh, isn't that cute? Yeah, kumbaya, here we are in the moment. But really, like we can do that, and we do have the technology. And so, yeah, I think in this moment, it partly is to just tell people, create archives in ways that we can create archives, right? Talk about new technology and new ways of doing activism and new ways of thinking. When you harness the power of these robots in our pockets, but then we don't want AI to get a hold of it. God damn it, there's no easy solution. Anyway, that's one of the things I think we can encourage. Yeah.
I was going to say similar kind of that many years ago, I'll say his name again, I mentioned him last night. We had Jay Winter, a cultural historian here, and he stepped up after a local historian who was talking about family history. And he stood up and he said, well, all history starts with family history. And, we saw the Blakes, saw Christina today sharing some of her family history. And I've often, friends have heard me say this before, I think we needed them days for the whole province to, somehow start collecting those stories of well-known women, not so well-known women, our families. And you might think like, well, one person's story, my mother's story, it's an interesting story. She's only one person, but, many of her experiences would resonate with a lot of other women. So, I'd like to find some way to start collecting these stories. And I mean, I think we all enjoy, if you're going through the archives and you're reading, documents and tables, and then you find some wonderful story about an individual. And that, can spark your interest in a subject and spark questions. I think it can spark interest of young people to tell stories of individual people.
Can I suggest too that we also talk to more people outside of the province of Newfoundland? And I know that we've been somewhat hampered, by a historical association that, doesn't come east anymore. So that's in terms of academics, but we do have a tendency to talk among ourselves as Newfoundlanders and not reach out so much to people off of, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm saying Newfoundlanders, I can't say Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, I've been away too long. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that our work intersects with other work and broader histories. And if we could get ourselves on the map that way, reach out to other people who are doing similar work and collaborate with them and maybe reach into some pockets of money that way, to try to get more on the go. That would be one thing. And my other thing, because I know we're getting short of time, and I said to God, I'm going to make a bid for this. When we talk to people and we use the words traditional gender roles or traditional gender relations, what in God's name are we talking about? When my students know that if they use that in a paper, they're going to get a big circle around it and they're going to lose marks. Because whose tradition? What culture? Where are we talking about? What time frame? Even,
Back in the day, Willie. It was back in the day.
Right?
Was it?
But
Fascinating.
looking at all those, different cultural groups, and all the possibilities that are out there in terms of organizing gender. And we always think that there is, the present moment when we're trying to fix it all. And then our mind, I know that most people's minds are going to sort of, 19th century, 20th century gender relations. Where's the rest of the time gone? Because there were all sorts of differences in gender relations then. And we're not, our young people don't know that. And a lot of people out in the community don't know that either. And we've got, in terms of Indigenous groups here, in terms of English and Irish groups here, we've got other stuff going on besides that. And we don't have enough of it out there. So that's my pitch. I want somebody else in the earlier period besides me. Really, we need it.
Hi, I'm going to come in. I'm the person from outside that's getting money from outside sources. That was part of the point of the Lloyd's application. I reached out to Lloyd's because I had met Lloyd's at a conference. I got I came up here for my master's, but I got my PhD in Texas. But to do that, I had to convince somebody in Texas that I could do maritime history in Austin, Texas. And then I did. And guess what? I found Napoleonic diaries in the Ransom Center. I didn't find that. The archivist found that. All the archivists here know what I mean when I say I found that. They found that and gave it to me because they're nice. But as somebody that has to, I always have to pay a lot of attention to narratives in what I'm doing. And so I'm always listening for narratives. And there are a couple of narratives that I've heard today that I actually want to push back on. One of them is the narrative that there is no money. And it is true that opportunities for money, ways for us to get the money in the ways that we're used to, grant applications are narrowing down quite a bit. That doesn't mean there's no money. That means the money is going elsewhere and it needs to be accessed in other ways. Grant applications are not the be-all, end-all of how we got funding. They were invented as a process to get funding, and it may be that we just have to invent another process to get ourselves funding, and that sucks and is difficult. But it's not that there's no money, it's that the money is going other places. And again, I want to push back a little bit too on, it's not that there's no support. The minute you start talking to anybody, and I have a really good in because, oh, people love talking about boats. They love talking about maritime stuff. They love talking about the Titanic. They love talking about pirates. So I've got an easy in. And the minute you start talking to anybody, you can get them around to something interesting that they didn't know, and they'll be happy to hear it. The interest is there. It is hard maybe to access. We don't necessarily try to approach it in the best way. We're not getting out in front of all the people in all the ways that maybe we want to get out in front of there. But the major thing that has changed is that the university is a public good, right? Universities aren't free. They aren't magical things that spring out of the earth like mushrooms. You can't just knock down a university and then there'll be 5 more universities next spring. It's a public good that has to be maintained. And you need to remind people that if we don't maintain it, it's going to be way harder to build a new one than it is to fix the one that we've got, right? This is the story. This is the story that I hear. That's one of the reasons I'm so into the university archive is the story of Memorial is a story that is very, very interesting to me. And one of the big stories about Memorial is the fact that it took Confederation to get it into a position where it is now. And I don't think we're going to confederate again. I hope not. The only people offering Confederation, I wouldn't advise you to take that. I will speak from experience, just say no. So yes, it may take something extraordinary. It may take something unexpected. It may take something different, but we need to realign with the idea that the university is a public good and the people of the province deserve it. They deserve to have it. They deserve to have a good one. And they deserve to be able to access it. We're not here for fun. We are here for fun, but also for the people of the province. Sorry,
So coming back to like the archives and the documents being lost, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I know I've got some documents sitting in my own home and actually put them in a box in the, okay, when the wildfires were on, this is the box that we save. But given that, and given that we're out looking at these documents, would there be interest from, anyone, if there were workshops on how we should be digitizing these, doing the metadata so that it could be on something like the DAI so that it's more accessible? Because it is something that Heritage NL does, but perhaps there could be workshops either through us or Manal. This is just an idea to see if there's interest. So that we can all be part of that to be able to put these documents in accessible areas. I see some nodding of heads, but
Yes.
I think that's an absolutely fabulous idea. And there are documents out there still in local history museums that didn't get captured in the kind of inventory that was done, heavens, when was it, the later 80s, early 90s or something? Tons more stuff has come in, and there's no way to readily see what's there. And then we know of the horrible situation that local museums are in terms of funding. And so we risk losing stuff that has already been collected, much less things that are moldering away in people's barns. But yeah, a major digitization project would be fabulous.
Your oral history collection project would also be fabulous.
Okay, thank you. I'm part of the National Federation of Organizations. We have 90 clubs across Canada. It's Canadian Federation of University Women. And some years ago, we had Linda White talk to our people, and she wrote a paper, and we distributed it to all our 90 clubs, each of which has someone to look after archives. So, but that was back a few years ago, and so now we're updating, and we're starting now this month to do workshops with our archivists. Well, with the people looking after the archives, I should say, in the clubs, and we have a recognized archivist who is doing the workshops with them. So I think that that sort of thing could be done with other organizations as well.
Mm-hmm.
Our national archives are actually kept in Ottawa at the National, I guess it's called the National Archives, you know, and they've all been digitized. So I think it's a really important thing to do, and a lot of materials get lost if people don't know how to keep them, and you've got volunteers doing everything in our clubs. So well, actually, I think volunteers do great work, where, you know, but they really need to know what to do, what to keep. And some years ago, Linda White actually, when she met with us, we went through papers with her and got a pretty good idea of how to do it. But it does need some, you know, you need some help with it. Thank you.
I have to apologize because I thought I had a really good comment to make, but I have menopause as well, and I have forgotten, but it had to do with archives. But yes, Heritage NL, we do these things, it's called scanning parties, and we go into communities and we invite people in the communities to bring out whatever and get it scanned. And when we started having them first, it was the same thing. People started bringing out what they thought was important. And we're like, you know, but it's not so much what they think is important, but what they think others might think is important. So we said we want to see your family history and bring out the stuff from your family, because pictures is a big part of it. But a lot of the pictures we started getting, we said bring out your first communion pictures and bring out your wedding pictures. And it started this, like, it shows that kind of whole social history. And again, I think it's getting the education out of what is important, because we try to fit things into different little, you know, pigeonholes and say, well, yeah, this is what someone has approved as being important. And I think the way that teacher history and culture is being taught in schools is one reason why that's happening. But yes, I think getting out and doing these community events and kind of raising the whole awareness of your individual and community history is very important.
I love the idea of community organizing events of various sorts, making sure people are archiving their materials and so on. I do want to point out, though, that as a CFA, I don't feel like I belong to a lot of those initiatives. So when someone says, bring your stuff to a community scanning event, I don't think I belong to that community scanning event. I don't think I will ever belong to a scanning event like that. And I know that there have also been issues around community organizations, particularly around new women groups, for example, and organizations that have chosen not to put their stuff with official archives because they don't want to be subsumed into state narratives that have erased them and actively been problematic. So I think if we're gathering stories, we need to think about whose stories we're gathering, on what grounds we're gathering them, why we're gathering, how we're gathering them, how we're going to keep them, which stories matter, because there are things, I mean, yeah, my youngest son has lived in Newfoundland and Labrador since he was 3. He will always see himself as a CFA. I've talked to him about that, right? And he's been here since he was 3. And he will never see himself as being from Newfoundland and Labrador. And so in those cases, you can have as many scanning parties as you want, as many attempts you can say, this is our history, but who is our? And I think that that's a really big problem still at the moment. I think part of it is also curriculum. The assignments they get at school assume that people have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10
Yeah.
generations.
Yeah,
They're still
right. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And they don't go to first patient.
You guys are doing such important work. How is your funding? Because again, coming back to the dollars and cents, right?
$1,000 a year.
It's awful. It's ridiculous.
Did everyone hear that?
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Loud.
We are mandated to designate heritage buildings. We've designated 350 so far. Every year we get 150,000 for restoration of those buildings. And our budget is, it is a 6-figure budget because we have 3.5 positions. But I mean, if you look at our budget compared to other places, it's not very big.
Have to get the culture to pay attention.
And because we're a crown corporation, I probably just said too much right then, you know what I mean?
And because we're a Crown Corporation, there's a lot of grants and funds that we can't actually avail of. So we make do with what we can, and we do a lot with very little money. I think Andrea does most of it.
No, that's not true. No, correct that.
Okay. Oh, yes, that's true. All of our staff do a lot. They all have many different roles, but the scanning parties have been a big thing in the past couple of years, and really trying to say to people, it's all part of the culture and the history. No matter how long you've been somewhere, no matter where your people came from, what their background is, it's not just fish, it's everything. Yeah, we haven't done much on fish in a while.
Yes, that's important, right? Getting that message out there is hugely important. Yeah.
It strikes me that with the absence of funding, we need political action. And just as an example of what was done in Kitty Vitty Village, the launch, the boat slipway was deteriorating, and the city said they couldn't afford to fix it. So community people organized, and there was an online campaign as well, you know, with people pointing out the history of this slipway and the importance to tourism. And lo and behold, after a fight, the money came through. So I don't know, Margot, if you're going to say anything. When I was teaching labor studies in Michigan, and they wanted to cut out university labor education, people organized through their unions and through the State Labor Federation to get that reversed. But it's appalling to me that you're suffering the way you are, the Newfoundland Heritage Society. And look at the tourism we have here. I mean, could there be a tax placed on the ships that come in, you know, to support heritage in the city of St. John's? I don't know, but I'm going wild with this idea, but.
Sure good. Yeah. Great idea.
Wow. Well, I was just going to add that it's really frustrating when the province markets itself on heritage. You get in a plane and you see Newfoundland, Labrador advertisements for tourism, and it's salt box houses, lines of clothing, the views of the sea, a whisper of a human body in the background somewhere because there's no one there. It's just beautiful views of houses and and like one tree that's been there for 50 years. It's only like 1.5 feet tall. And you're like, I wish that they would put their money where their mouth is. If we're a heritage province, if that's what people are coming to see, if all like people you get on the ferry and it's like 500,000 people from Ontario and Quebec on motorcycles all going to Twillingate and Fogo, then put money into heritage, for God's sakes.
And on that note, I think we will conclude our roundtable this afternoon. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone for the great discussion. And now, in the last 10 minutes, I invite our president, Dr. Rebecca Ralph, to say a few closing remarks.
All right, I won't take very long, as I think we've all, we've really put our time in these past few days, but I want to take a few moments to do a couple of things. First, I'd like to acknowledge all of the support that we did receive to put off these events. We were supported by the university through the Office of Public Engagement. We've received support from different departments, from gender studies, mentorship and support also from the Newfoundland Labrador Historical Society, from the history department. And that has been foundational to our ability to do this. We've also, of course, had support from various granting agencies and small places from the province. And we also, of course, received support from the Office of Women's and Gender Studies. Sorry, I meant to say Office of Women's and Gender Equality. Obviously, we got support from Gender Studies as well. And that those things have been really important. We've also, of course, could not have done this without a very active volunteer board and without the members of our subcommittee for this symposium. And I want to take a particular moment here to highlight the incredible effort of that committee and of its two co-chairs. We wouldn't be here in this room, we wouldn't have all of these nice things, and we wouldn't be having these moments to think about this, to have had research happen because of this, and to have pathways forward without the hard work of Dr. Heidi Coombs and Dr. Vicki Hallett. I want to end our day today with some thoughts on what has transpired the past couple of days. But I also want to note as well that we're not done, as that we do have another night. Well, not another night, we have the rest of tonight, and we have an incredible event about women and writing and history at Colonial Building. And for those of you planning to join us, please, I know you might be tired, but have another cup of coffee and please make sure you come or consider joining or join us online. We're so excited and we're not done. I was struck by the many conversations that have happened over the course of these 2 days here at these talks. I have been struck by the things that I didn't know and the things that I've learned and the people that I've reflected on and remembered. And I think the biggest takeaway came from, for me, that very first panel and roundtable, growing out of course, that reflection work of that incredible accomplishments of this field by our own Dr. Linda Keeley, and the comment that Jerry Rogers made, we have to get together. We need that idea of radical hospitality. This is possible. We've had it. We've had 2 days. We've had papers. We've had talks. We've had events with the Lieutenant Governor in attendance. We have had a moment to make this visible, and this is possible to keep going. And I was also further struck by the start of Margot's talk at the rooms, talking about women's organizing and talking about those women in the factory and the fact that volunteerism is vibrant, it is possible, and it is an engine through which we can come together, even when it's messy, even when we're going to argue, even when we don't know what our priorities might be, but it is possible. And that, I think, is the takeaway from this symposium. I'm always struck, and I can always hear it in the back of my head, the song Up She Rises, that Heidi, chose and stuff for our name. And that idea of a ship going through difficult waters. You go up, you go down, you struggle with funding, you struggle with people, you struggle with time, but you keep on going. And I think that's what we've learned from our 2 days. That's my biggest takeaway, is we have gotten together in the past and done incredible things. We continue to do so. And I think that what I see in this room is a commitment to continue that. And I want to thank everyone here for being in attendance, for being a part of this. And on behalf of the Newfoundland Labrador Historical Society, we were so honored to get to do this. And we hope to continue that commitment. And thank you all.